different than maybe what we're accustomed to. Since the beginning of the year, we've been walking through the practices of the way of Jesus. And we've actually walked through 9 different practices. Serge, I'm actually going to take over here with the clicker, I think. I might be able to. There we go. We're going to be walking, we've walked through since January. So it's been 9 months, 10 months, where we've walked through what it means to pattern our lives after Jesus. We've walked through 9 practices where we've spent roughly 3 to 4 weeks on each spiritual practice or spiritual discipline that we've walked through. We've walked through Sabbath, which is rest in God's rhythm. From the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He worked for 6 days and then he rested and consecrated this specific day of rest, to be able to worship, to delight in God's creation. It reminds us that our identity is not in productivity. In a world where production is key for all of us, we're invited into this rest in who Jesus is that is not about production, what you and I can produce. It is not about being productivity, but it is in being loved children of God. And Sabbath, we talked about, it's just carving out that time and space. For the Jews, it was on a Saturday. For us, that doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's a Sunday. Sometimes it's a 4-hour period where I need to step away and just turn off the devices and find some rest for my soul. Jesus would say, "Come unto me, all you who are weary, and you will find rest for your souls." We looked at prayer. This is abiding conversation. Prayer is our own ongoing dialogue with the Father, aligning our hearts with His will and experiencing His presence in all of our circumstances. Prayer, talking to God and also listening to God. It's a conversation that I get to have with my Heavenly Father. We looked at solitude. Jesus exemplified this. All of these practices, Jesus Himself would exemplify. Being alone with God, stepping away from the noise and people to be alone with God. Solitude cultivates intimacy, self-awareness, and dependence on Him. It is in the moments of silence, it's in the moments of solitude that I recognize what we were singing about this morning, my desperate need of God. It also makes us very aware of our enemies. The enemy of our flesh, which likes to talk a lot, right? When we're in our moments of silence and solitude. The enemy of Satan himself. We encounter those enemies, the flesh, and you encounter yourself. But in the space of solitude, we also get to encounter God Himself. We looked at the example of Elijah finding God in the space of solitude. I loved, as we walked through the practice of Scripture, listening to God's voice, opening the Scriptures, meditating on the Scriptures, reading it, allowing it to change and transform our lives, engaging the Scriptures as God's living Word that shapes our thoughts, our affections, and our actions. It trains us in truth and equips us for every good work, Timothy says. We looked at community. That is what we're doing here this morning. That's one portion of it. It is following Jesus in relationship with others. When Jesus called His disciples, He not only called them to Himself, but He also called them to each other. Peter, James, John, Andrew, you go on down the list. He called Matthew the tax collector. He also called Simon the zealot. 2 political oppositions into one relationship with Jesus. Following Jesus in relationship with others. This includes sharing meals. Kind of do a lot of that around here. Sharing meals, sharing the tables. It's sharing our thoughts. It's sharing our affections. It's sharing our burdens. It's a space of encouragement. Spiritual growth happens best in the context of committed relationships. This is why we have that Tuesday night gathering where we're coming together and we're sharing the table and we're sharing our hearts. Nobody wants to hear me talk all the time, right? We come together, we get to hear from each other. and open up the scriptures together. And we grow together in community. We looked at the practice of generosity, freely giving of our time, of our money, and our resources in response to God's lavish grace to us. My dad talked about this morning, his charis towards us. God's grace towards us that we are now extending to others. Generosity reflects His character and breaks the grip of greed that often possesses us. The desire, the love of money, which is the root of all evil. Generosity allows us to live with open hands. Nothing I have belongs to me. It is for God, for others. It's not just generosity within the church either. It's generosity to our world. That means tipping well this afternoon. That means seeing someone in need and being willing to reach into my pocket or say, hey, I've got the resources to be able to help you. We looked at the practice of fasting, what it means to hunger for God, abstaining from food or comforts to focus on prayer and dependence on God. Fasting awakens spiritual hunger and realigns our desires with His. That was a fun practice, was it not? I found out really quickly where my desires were at. Practicing fasting, I thought would give me more of a revelation of who God is. It actually more revealed who I was and what my potential of failure and my lusts and desires were at. We look at the practice of service. Love that is in action. Serving others with humility and compassion, following the example of Jesus who came not to be served, but to serve. We looked at the concepts of serving the least of these, those in our community that most of society pushes off to the sides. And Jesus would say, hey, when you have served the least of these, you have done it unto me. There's two instances where Jesus communicates that the way that we act and react towards certain groups of people is the way that we interact with Him. It's the least of these and also the children. He says, you offend one of these little ones, you've offended me. And then lastly, we looked at witness. What it means to live and speak as witnesses of Jesus' transforming power, not only to share Jesus, not only to talk about Jesus, but also to show Jesus. Many of us are maybe really good at planting the label on us. I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, but then our actions don't show that way. We're late to work. We don't work hard. We're unkind to our coworkers. Our family members don't see Jesus in our lives. We looked at that word witness, which is a very strong word. It was a legal term in that context. It's also a legal term today. The Greek word is the Greek word martus, which is where we get the word martyr from. Martyrdom didn't come until later. It was a legal term. It was one who had seen and experienced something and then would testify of that to another. Well, those who had seen and experienced Jesus began to testify of that to others, and they lost their lives as a result of it. And that's where the word martyr got connected to the death of those who are witnessing on behalf of their experience with Jesus. 1 John 1 talks about John the beloved. He's the writer of the book. And he says, that which we have seen, that which we have heard, that which our hands have handled of the word of life. This is what we're doing. We're declaring this unto you. We bear witness of this to you. And that's what we're to be to this world, which is full of darkness, is it not? And we're to be that light, carrying the love of Jesus, His transforming power, the good news or the gospel to our world. Not only in our words, but in our way of life. So what we're going to be looking at this morning is a rule of life. You say, well, what is a rule of life? A rule of life is a schedule and set of practices. We've just looked at 9. By the way, you could spend a lifetime looking at more practices from the way of Jesus. We've just covered 9, and it took us almost a year, right? What it means to pattern our life after Him. A rule of life is a schedule and set of practices and relational rhythms that help us create space in our busy world for us to be with Jesus. Because if you're like me, after covering all 9 of those practices, after spending almost 4 weeks for each practices, did you get a little overwhelmed? Like, wow, I'm just like falling short in all of these areas in my life. Where do I even begin? Where do I even start? Well, this is where the rule of life comes into play. This is where the practices not only are just something that we talk about, something that we teach about, something that we discuss about, but something that actually begins to become a part of our lives and actually begins to transform our life. Do you realize that? This is what teaching and preaching and opening the scriptures is for. It's not just for information. It's for transformation. For your life and my life to be changed by Jesus. So the rule of life. It is a schedule, set of practices, relational rhythms that help us create space in our busy world for us to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what He did. Or as John 10 verse 10 says, to live abundantly or to the full in Jesus' kingdom and in alignment with our deepest needs and our priorities. You say our deepest needs. Yes. You see, oftentimes our greatest want or our greatest need, quote unquote, is not always necessarily our deepest need. There's a lot of things that you and I say, wow, I really need that. But when it comes to the deepest needs, to the core of who you and I are as followers of Jesus, who've encountered this Jesus and desiring to be transformed by Him, that is where the deepest needs get met. While the word rule, okay, a rule of life, in our modern context, that's not a word we like to hear. Rules, I hate rules. I didn't like rules as a kid, right? Often it was in school, you had some type of rules. When we go to camp, you had some type of rules, and every time it's just like, oh man, I don't even like communicating rules, right? So I'm like, I soften it a little bit. It's just guidelines for you. But it really is rules. Well, because we're so scared of the word rule, sometimes when we think of a rule of life, it may strike you as a strict or a binding constraint. However, the Latin word that we translate rule from was originally the word for a trellis in a vineyard. The word rule was the word regula, which simply meant a trellis in a vineyard. In the same way that a vine needs a trellis to lift it off the ground so it can bear the maximum amount of fruit and keep free of predators and diseases, we need a rule or a trellis as a kind of support structure to organize our life around abiding in the vine. So, are we there in John chapter 15? Let me get there as well, all right? John chapter 15. Say, I went to church and they talked about rules. See? Told you. John chapter 15, look at verse number 1. Jesus says, I am the true vine. I mean, that language in and of itself, you could do some more study on that. Look at what the vine was in the Old Testament. Jesus, when He shows up on the scene, He says, I am the true vine. And my Father is the husbandman or the farmer or the vine dresser. He says, every branch in me that beareth not fruit, He taketh away. So we'll kind of focus on this verse here. Verse number 2, every branch in me that beareth not fruit, He taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, He purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. I'll read down just a little bit, but we'll come back to verse number 2. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except ye abide in me. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. Well, when it comes to this word here, this phrase here, every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. I've often been confused by this phrase, because I was like, so he just like breaks it off and just like, sorry, dude, you messed up. You're not bearing fruit, and throws me away. But the word taketh away here is actually the Greek word airo, which means to lift or to bear up, to raise, or to keep in suspense. Now, I'm not a vine dresser or farmer by any means, but those of you who have messed with vines of any kind know that this is a process by which you have to walk through in order for that vine to produce the fruit needed. Why? Because the vine cannot stay just laying on the ground. What happens to a vine that lays on the ground, and the branches that lay on the ground, or the fruit that's trying to be produced that are on the ground? What happens? It just gets stepped on. It just gets trampled on. It doesn't allow for sunlight to be able to contact that vine and those branches for the fruit to be able to be produced in that. So when it says here in verse number 2 that every branch in me that beareth not fruit, it's not that he taketh away and breaks it off and throws it away. It's that he bears it up. He places it on some type of trellis, a regula, in order for fruit to bear on that branch. And then when it does produce fruit, he purgeth it. And that is the pruning process whereby the little dead branches that are connected to that vine get kind of carefully picked off. I used this example before, but when I was about a teenager, my mom said, hey, would you go outside and prune the rose bushes? I was like, sure. Give me a set of clippers. I'll go at it. And she gave me that task for the day. I think it was like a Saturday or something, and said, hey, would you prune those rose bushes? They were kind of overhanging the sidewalk up to the front door. And so said, shears, those little clippers are in the garage. And so, got my breakfast, got out there, beautiful California Saturday morning, grabbed my set of clippers, and I just went. And I'm like stepping back, like looking, making sure, right? Can you imagine what my mom walked into when she came home that day? She walked around the corner of the garage, went to walk up the sidewalk. My beautiful rose bushes. I said, prune them. And I said, isn't that what I did? I just cut it back. No. And now I know. You got to carefully identify the portion and part of the branch that needs to be snipped carefully. You got to make sure that there's the potential for more branches to be able to sprout out, for more blooms. That would be the fruit of a rose bush. But when it comes to the vine, the grapevine, it's the fruit, the grapefruit. Grapefruit? That isn't, okay, you got me. The fruit that is produced in that is what others get to see. And if you walk through John 15, you'll see that there's the fruit of joy, there's the fruit of love, there's the fruit of peace, which shows up a little bit later when Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit. So when it comes to this rule of life, it needs something to be able to be suspended, to be borne up, to be raised, to keep in suspense. So we've just covered these practices, we need to craft a rule of life. There's no right way to make a rule of life. Just as there's no official rule of life that's been passed down for over thousands of years. But people have been practicing some type of form of rule of life, whether you recognize it or not, by the way. You have some type of rhythm, you have some type of habits that you fall into on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis that take place in your life. Whether you have it written down or not, you have rhythms, you have a rule of life. And maybe it looks a little messy, right? Maybe you're like, I don't know, I don't even know. But it's there, but you do. You have some type of structure to your life. Maybe it's like crumbling and got all over the place, like mine is, right? But it's there. It's present. So what would it mean for us to intentionally structure our lives around the way of Jesus, around the patterns that we've just walked through for the last 9 months? What it means to Sabbath, to find rest, what it means to find silence. So there's no rule about the rule, all right? There is, however, best practices that we should all be wise to incorporate at some level. No matter our personality or stage of life, morning prayer, Sabbath, church on Sunday, regular rest, these are all needs that we desperately have. But there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So do it however you want. Make your rule simple or complex. Different personalities are going to nerd out on this process, right? I'm just going to, I'm a multitasker and I can get... By the way, this is about doing less, you'll find out, than it is about adding more. Oftentimes, we think addition, think mathematically, we think addition, instead of what is actually going to take place is subtraction in our life. Wow, this is not a priority of the way of Jesus. So I'm going to need to subtract some things in my life that are detracting away from the practices of the way of Jesus. We'll get to this process of crafting a rule of life at the end here. What should I consider as I craft my rule of life? Here are just a few recommendations. So what you're going to be doing is, and I'll share basically a QR code at the very end, where you are personally going to go to that website. We'll have the link down below as well. We'll leave it up at the very end, where you go home with you and your spouse, if you're married, and you begin to formulate craft a rule of life for your family or for you as an individual. What it means for you as an individual to follow Jesus in patterning our lives after him through these spiritual practices. And you're going to begin to structure that. Some of them run together. Prayer and Sabbath and solitude sometimes all run together. Well, what does it mean for me to wake up at a certain time to be able to have that time with Jesus in the morning? What does it mean? I want to study the scriptures. Well, when? I've got kids. When is that going to take place? Well, it means I'm going to have to carve out some time or subtract some things that I'm giving myself to in order for the scriptures to take priority in my life. Prayer, fasting, community. Man, I just feel like I'm just doing life alone. I'm busy, but I'm just feel like I'm just going through the motions. What would it look like for you to say, hey, I'm going to start making appointments with people. I'm going to start having people over to my house and eating dinner together to enjoy that community. So with all of that in mind, these 9 practices that we've personally covered, and you can go beyond that if you want. Above all, never forget that a rule of life is a means to an end. The end is to be with Jesus, to become like him, and to do what he did. That's the end goal. The goal is not the practice itself. Because that we've done a lot of that, right, in church. A lot of checkbox. All right, you gave me a checkbox. I checked it. I did that. That's not the end goal. The end goal is to be with Jesus and that we are transformed by him. We become like him. Never forget that is the rule, the end goal of the rule of life. The end is to be with Jesus, to become like him, to do what he did. Or as Jesus puts it in John 15 here, to abide in the vine and to bear much fruit. So start small. As with creating any new set of goals, some of you are great at that. Some of you at the beginning of the year, you have your SMART goals, you have your vision boards, and you are really good at crafting those. Start small. when it comes to the spiritual practices and disciplines of the way of Jesus. It's tempting to overreach and attempt to live like a monk from day one. We're not monks. We're living everyday life, interacting with people. We have families, we have lives. So what would it mean for you as an individual to follow Jesus in your context of life? The overreaching, trying to set huge and large goals, is a strategy bound to fail. Start where you are, not where you feel like you should be. Unrealistic goals just leave us discouraged and disillusioned. Doable for each of the categories that we've covered. You may need to work toward that as an eventual goal. Man, I want to incorporate all 9 of these into my life. Well, start small. Start with 1. You're like, man, that's not very spiritual. Where are you at right now? How about just take that baby step? Be specific. Look for practices that are practical, that are concrete, that are embodied, not vague and ideological. Not I need to be more relaxed. But what does that look like? I'm going to schedule time for rest. We schedule a doctor's appointment. Right? We schedule all kinds of things. Why not schedule a time for rest for your soul? And you can go back and watch our Sabbath teachings and find out that it's a whole lot of fun. Sabbath is a lot of fun. It's rest. It's getting to feast. This is the Old Testament practice of feasting and getting to rest and enjoy family and community, all of that. But you're not busy about this task and that task, and it's putting aside devices. I mean, that's a huge avenue of hurriedness in our life. Consider your personality. If you're introverted, maybe you need to carve out plenty of time to be alone in the quiet. You saw solitude and you were like, yes, I live in solitude. That's great. I'm doing that. Maybe you need to make sure you have that space of time, but also begin to push yourself out of your comfort zone and maybe say, maybe I need a little more community. Maybe it's just a one-on-one is where you got to start. A coffee with someone. Maybe it's going to one of our Tuesday night gatherings and saying, I'm going to take that step into community. Maybe you're extroverted. And you already have a lot of time with friends. You're already having people over. You're already over to their house. Maybe you need to spend more time in solitude, in silence. Consider your season of life. I mean, there's a spectrum of seasons of life that I'm looking at this morning. Single to married to older in age, to young kids to older kids, to kids who are out of the house. There's a whole spectrum. College, work, school. Consider your life stage. If you have little kids, you got to start small. Start small. Start very small. Go really easy on yourself. If you're new to following Jesus and just beginning to learn about practices like silence and solitude and or Sabbath, don't copy someone who's 20 years down the road. I've caught myself doing that. And I'm like, I look at this person, I'm like, wow, they just have such a rich time with the Lord, and they get to spend hours like bathing in God's presence. And I'm like, that's just not realistic for me at this stage of life, between work and church and family and kids and wife and all of that. And so with that, keep that in mind. Keep a healthy balance of structure and spontaneity. Don't let your rule become rigid, boring, or legalistic. All right? You're like, man, I carved out this time, and this person invited me over for dinner. Nope. Be flexible. Never let it override the Spirit's frequently unscheduled interruptions in our days. Savannah's dad is a pastor as well. He calls it the ministry of interruptions. The ministry of interruptions. Don't you go throughout your day and there's often interruptions of some kind. And you're like, in your mind, you're like, this is not what I planned on today. And it's an interruption. It's a diversion. Maybe consider the Spirit in that process. Lord, this happened. I was not expecting it. But Spirit of God, you're aware of it. Guide me in this process. Help me to react and act in a way that pleases you. I'm asking for your presence in this situation, this person, this flat tire, okay? Remember that a good rule is a working document. It's not static. Life is a bit of a moving target, so we have to regularly review our rule or our regula and make sure it's still bringing us life with God and others. If you are sacrificing healthy relationship with God or others in order to accomplish your rule, this version of your rule has ceased to aid you in the goal of drawing closer to God and becoming a person of love. Because that's really what it is about. It is us spending time with Jesus to become like Jesus and to go and do what Jesus did in our communities and in our world. All right, so where do we go from here? Next step for you is to go to this website where you can begin to formulate your own rule of life for your context, for your stage of life. If you're married, this is highly recommended that you do that together, because husband can't be doing one thing, wife doing the other, because you're going to begin to conflict. So you're going to work together on what does this look like for us together to begin to craft a rule of life. What does it mean for us to follow Jesus together? And there's many aspects you'll be like, oh, I'm already filling this with this avenue, whether it's church community or whether it's you already have a rhythm of Sunday lunch or a Sabbath dinner of some kind. It's just not labeled that. You're just like, oh, wow, that's already, and that can be encouraging in your process as you walk through this. I don't really do this often, but do you have any questions before I just close with a word of prayer this morning? I told you it was a little bit different, slightly different this morning. Any thoughts? Any concerns? Complaints? How many of you want to follow Jesus? That's really what it is, right? I want to follow Jesus. I want him to change and transform my life. Well, it doesn't begin by accident. Discipleship, that's what this is. Discipleship does not begin by accident. It begins by me intentionally choosing to follow Jesus. You know when Jesus called Peter and Andrew on the shores of Galilee, what did they have to do first in order to follow him? It says they forsook their nets and followed Jesus. So there's going to be a process of some forsaking some things in your life in order to follow Jesus. All right? Let's bow our heads and close with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for your love to us and your kindness towards us. We're grateful for who you are. We're grateful that you are patient with us. You put up with us. We're grateful that you're calling us into a relationship with you. You're calling us to follow you. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.